And last Sunday we read part 1 of The Quiet Mind. And like this week I thought, oh, we're going to read part 2 of The Quiet Mind. I love it when a plan comes together. So I passed out pages 3 and 4. And so I think what we talked about last week is that you can actually be more successful in life if you can kind of quiet your ego a bit. And he made it clear that ego isn't self-esteem, right? We need to have a sense of self, and we need to have self-esteem. It's wanting to be right and not being open to new information and not being willing to change your mind, not being flexible. We're going to look at the second page. So here he goes into more skills. So I think he kind of laid out the problem and the issues. And I mentioned before, I thought this was a really good article because, you know, if you just talk about the problem, it can be kind of negative and depressing. And if you only talk about the solution, it can be overly optimistic and idealistic. So it's kind of nice to marry an issue with a skill. So the pressing need for everyone to quiet their minds. And this is the one on page 4 where we actually have the asterisk. So curious where you lie on the quiet ego continuum. Here are 14 items that will give you a rough estimation. If you find yourself nodding in strong agreement to most of these items, you probably have a quiet ego. So everybody, go like this. Go, yeah, that's me. So on the quiet ego scale, the QES, number 1, I often pay attention when I'm doing things. Number 2, I don't do jobs or tasks automatically. I'm aware of what I'm doing. I don't rush through activities without being really attentive to them. Number 4, I feel a connection to all living things. Number 5, I feel a connection with strangers. 6, I feel a connection to people of other races. 7, before criticizing somebody, I try to imagine how I would feel if I were in their place. Number 8, when I'm upset at someone, I usually try to put myself in his or her shoes for a while. 9, I try to look at everybody's side of a disagreement before I make a decision. 10, I find it easy to see things from another person's point of view. 11, for me, life has been a continuous process of learning, changing, and growth. 12, I think it is important to have new experiences that challenge how you think about yourself and the world. 13, I have the sense that I have developed a lot as a person over time. 14, when I think about it, I have really improved a lot as a person over the years. Those scoring higher on the quiet ego scale tend to be more interested in personal growth and balance and are more likely to seek growth through authenticity, mastery, and positive social relationships. While a quiet ego is positively related to having a healthy self-esteem, resilience, and healthy coping strategies for dealing with life stressors, it is also related to humanitarian attitudes and behaviors. This is consistent with the idea that a quiet ego balances compassion with self-protection and growth goals. Indeed, a good indication that one is growing is that the ego is quieting. A quiet ego is also associated with humility. So, we talk a lot about this in our tradition as gratitude and humility. A quiet ego is also associated with humility, spiritual growth, flexible thinking, open-minded thinking, the ability to savor everyday experiences, life satisfaction, risk-taking, and the feeling that life is meaningful. It's clear that a quiet ego is very conducive to living a full existence. In my own research, I found a zero relationship between having a quiet ego and scores on a measure of self-sacrificing and self-enhancement, which is actually facet of narcissism. Self-sacrificing, self-enhancement is measured by items such as sacrificing for others makes me feel better, makes me the better person. I try to show what a good person I am through my sacrifices. I like to have friends who rely on me because it makes me feel important. I feel important when others rely on me. So these would seem to be a good thing, but it's kind of making it about you. It's about, how it affects you. I noticed that a lot when Kobe died. There's nothing wrong with it, but some people, it was all about how it affected them. They took it very personally, and they weren't thinking about, maybe all 9 people on the helicopter and the families. It was kind of like, it became their story really quickly. This suggests that quieting the ego is not about just any sort of other concern, such as the ego-driven need to appear compassionate. It seems that the quiet ego is related to a genuine concern for the growth and development of self and others. In line with this, I found that the quiet ego was positively related to measures of compassion and empathy that were negatively correlated with self-sacrificing and self-enhancement. Consistent with prior research, I also found a positive relationship between a quiet ego and self-compassion. It appears then that those with a quiet ego tend to be loving, giving people, but also take care of themselves just as compassionately as they tend to take care of others. So I don't know if he's hitting on this, but one thing I found is when I kind of let myself off the hook and I wasn't so hard on myself, I was able to be more forgiving and understanding of others. So it's kind of weird. If you kind of forgive yourself, it's easier to forgive others. Another recent study conducted by Heidi Wayment and Jack Bauer further supports the notion that the quiet ego really does balance the needs of self and others. They found that having a quiet ego was associated with self-transcendent values, such as universalism and benevolence, as well as a self-direction and achievement. Also, the quiet ego was unrelated to conformity. These results underscore the centrality of growth and balance values to the quiet ego construct and make clear that quieting the ego does not quiet the self. In fact, I would like to put forward the following equation. The quieter the ego, the stronger one's best self emerges. So I like this because it's a math equation. I think it's time for our society to realize and put into practice the fact that you don't have to choose either concern for the self or concern for others. So this is a typical false choice or false dichotomy that we're presented often. Like I hear people say, one of the podcasts I listen to, one of the speakers says, I don't see why I have to pay taxes for schools, right? I don't have any kids. Why do I have to pay for schools? But it's in your best interest to have people educated and have children learning, a trade or a skill or finding meaning in their lives. And, if you want to get real cynical, those are the people that are going to buy your house, right, when you retire, right? You want them to they're going to be taking care of you when you're 80. In fact, intentionally practicing to maintain a healthy balance between these fundamental concerns is most conducive to health, growth, well-being, high performance, creativity, and actually arriving at the truth. Imagine if, in addition to learning math, reading, and sex education in school, we also learned how to cultivate the 4 characteristics of the quiet ego. Or imagine if before any potentially heated public debate, the ground rules included at least an attempt for all participants to practice these characteristics. Better yet, how about instead of the goal of the debate being who won, the debate concludes by having each participant state the things they learned from the other person as a result of the discussion? Would that really be so boring? If so, then I think the problem cuts even deeper than I thought. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that the cultivation of these skills in our society would lead to greater mental health, useful reality-based information, as well as peace and unity among humans. Instead of destroying each other, how about we learn from each other? And the asterisk from last week was, I say all of us because I really do believe that all of us, including me, can benefit from cultivating a quieter ego. This is a lifelong practice, and one that each of us are capable of committing to and moving toward in our daily lives. Recent research suggests that there are activities that do in fact enhance people's quiet ego functioning. So On the way here, I was listening to a podcast, and there's a new book titled something like Zombies That Don't Die, The Zombies That Don't Die. And the narrator of the podcast said, who are these zombies that you're talking about? Like what people? And the author said, no, it's not people, it's ideas. It's ideas that never die because we're attached to them in an emotional way. And he started listing a lot of political rhetoric that we're attached to, and we believe it to be true, and we want it to be true. But he said if you do fact-based policymaking, there's no evidence to suggest that these things are true. And so he's kind of speaking towards this, having an open mind and following the data and being able to change your opinion based on facts. And it's really quite interesting that, even some of the things I thought were true, I find out that there's no scientific evidence that they're true. I just feel like they should be true, but they're not. The other thing he mentioned in here quite a bit that I've talked about before is this idea of authenticity. So this is a major virtue from India, is leading an authentic life, that, like that movie with John Lennon. It might have been the 78-year-old John Lennon that was doodling on the beach. That might have been more authentic for him. It's hard to say. So it's not a measure of success or power, but that you're kind of living the life that resonates with you. Joseph Campbell says that you feel like you're on the beam. When you're on the beam and you're balanced, you know it. And when you're off balance and you're not on the beam, you can tell. He also had an example where a little boy wouldn't eat his carrots at a restaurant, and the dad got mad at him. And this is in Joseph Campbell's Power of Myth. And the dad was yelling at the little boy to eat his carrots, and Joseph Campbell could hear this. And he got really angry, and the wife said, he just doesn't like carrots. I mean, he'll eat every other vegetable. He just doesn't like carrots. And he said, I never got to do anything that I wanted to do in my life. I've always done what I was told. I've never had a choice. Why does he get to decide he doesn't get to have carrots? And, that just sounds like a tantrum, really. But Joseph Campbell was like, what a terrible life to state out loud that you've never done anything that you chose. You never did anything you wanted to do. Everything was always dictated to you. And that was an example he used of, you could be successful, but it's not a life of authenticity. So, any thoughts or comments? Oh, Marcia?
I came in late, so I might be off the mark, but one of the thoughts I had is in coming here and being mindful and trying to practice, I feel like I've gotten a little bit better at checking my ego, but I also see more of the unnecessary suffering in people that I care about, and I don't always know what to do. So an example, like last night or the night before, I was with my family, and my sister and brother-in-law were like arguing about, they decided where to send their kid to kindergarten, but they were talking about the process, and like one of them was saying, but you didn't even want to go to that open house, or you were going to send me without you, and the other one said, no, you said you were going to go and I would go with you. And then they start pulling up their text to see who was right. And they're in this heated, and it's so like ego, because I mean, they're in front of all this family and they could not stop themselves. And then like, it would seem like it was done, but then one of them would pull up another text, and I was just sitting there going like, oh man, this is so, like, it so doesn't matter. They've already decided right. Where their kid's going to school, like they're happy with their choice.
Right.
And I'm not able to do, I don't know how to be a bodhisattva yet, you know?
Right.
And my brother-in-law's mom, one time though, we were all at a family thing and they were doing their thing, fighting, and she was like, hey, you have company, you need to stop that and keep that to yourselves, you know? Like sort of like get a room or something, right? And I was just like, oh wow, and I realized in her way, she was saying, check your ego about yourselves, and you need to think about the other people here who have come to your house to be with you, and you need to not be thinking about your own self. And I didn't think about like what she did, even though it seemed so curt, it was refreshing and helpful, whereas I kind of just sit there. But this article helps me see, oh, she was kind of helping them check their egos, and she just said, stop it,
Right.
you know. But I'm still not there.
Yeah. So, these essays have like this Buddhist tone where I think the idea is that everybody needs to read this and try. So there wasn't a lot of advice here about how to convince other people to do it, right? So that's kind of a characteristic of Buddhism as well, is everybody needs to kind of see the problem and become aware and practice. And you can be a facilitator. I mean, what I try to do is get people to find a solution and not, like he said, who won. Like, it's not who wins the argument, it's trying to figure out a solution to a problem. And that's much more constructive. And then the thing about debates, the presidential debates, they immediately are ranking who won, who had the best zinger, and, and they do this a lot. It's a win or lose thing. And I think even debate in college is like that. The point is winning the argument, and there's techniques to do that, but it's not very constructive. You're not really sharing information or growing. So. Oh, John? He's right here. We need flags.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. Last night, my wife and I had this argument. It was really trivial. I was trying to explain to her this book I was reading, and who was writing it, and she would keep interrupting me. And I raised my voice up, and I kind of came down hard on her, and she got mad, and she told me to, just lower your voice and just be more civil. And I thought about that, and I said, yeah, I guess I was a little bit, high-pitched. So I calmed down, and I told her, what the story was, and then we both kind of calmed down and realized, yeah, okay.
Good.
And we both realized this is so trivial.
Right.
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 It doesn't really matter. So,
Right. So that's a huge victory, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that you'd never fight. It's just that
Yeah.
it doesn't become like a huge thing.
So I do listen to her.
Yeah. And we have it on film. We have it on film.
Oh, gosh. And one more thing about, who's right and who's wrong. I get the feeling that some people, it's easier to stay with their own beliefs and not listen to the other side.
Yes.
Now, how do you try to, correct that idea? I mean, some people are just so ingrained that, my beliefs are it and nothing else
Right.
matters. And I have a hard time trying to convince other people to see the other side.
Right. So I think in the extremes, that's really hard to do. I'm kind of hoping I'm still kind of hoping in America we're hearing extreme positions more than the center, I hope. And I've listened to podcasts where I've tried to have an open mind to the other political party. And like, for instance, one of the debates is that the president and the Supreme Court have gotten very, very powerful. And the president, and this is Democrat or Republican, is doing a lot of executive orders, and the Supreme Court makes a lot of judgments. And the Republicans were saying it's better if Congress and people vote because it's a majority. And even if you don't agree with the opinion, at least it was a vote and not the executive order or a Supreme Court ruling. So their fear is that the congressional branch is weakening and the other two are getting stronger, and that's a dangerous trend. And so when they said that, I was like, oh, I mean, yeah, I understand that would be a concern. Now, how you solve it is a whole nother can of worms. But I try to listen to different people. I try to choose podcasts that are somewhat balanced, and I get to hear other sides. And so that's helped me a lot.
Thank you.
The other thing that helps a lot when you argue is you're not supposed to use words like always, like you always do this. And it's also better if you describe behavior, right? Like you're raising your voice rather than saying, you think I'm stupid or something. Like you don't attribute it to something, you describe the behavior. And you can also talk about how you feel. I mean, that's important. I mean, if you're making somebody feel a certain way and that's not your intent, that's an important thing to hear. So
yeah, I can't get points like he just did, but so I was just thinking, just maybe not a very deep thought, but a couple things that I learned over time, and I think it was Einstein that said, I don't bother remembering phone numbers because I can always look them up. Don't argue facts. Don't ever argue facts. You can just look them up. And I know many times when you, especially before cell phones, and you could look things up, but getting in just ridiculous arguments over some fact thing because you couldn't look it up right at the moment.
Right.
And so that's one thing I've tried to really.
So where it gets difficult, I had a philosophy teacher when I was in college. She gave us this big debate that we read in my philosophy class, and we talked about what the debate was about, and we were mentioning all the details and all the specifics, and she kept telling us we were wrong. I got kind of frustrated. It's none of those things. She said the problem is they have different sources of information. So the facts, like one side was relying on the Bible, like maybe for creationism, and science. So that's a problem if you don't use. So that's the fear in our country, is that the different groups have a different set of facts, and that is a difficult hurdle to overcome. Yeah. Anyone else? Oh.
To follow up on what Russ just said, but I find that most people end up fighting about their emotions, about facts, not the facts themselves, and so everybody hunkers down into their position,
Right.
because of how something makes them feel,
Right.
and so I just would like this to be like the terms of use for Facebook and everything.
Yeah.
That you have you have to prove that you've read these 14 things before you can move on and join up.
So one thing
great.
I do with people on emotions and feelings, and I think this is really great, and I'm really proud of myself, but it's never worked. So that's another thing. I try as hard as I can. I've never been successful. But somebody will say, I feel this way. And I say, I'm not going to invalidate your feelings. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. You do feel that way. But in a Buddhist sense, you don't have to trust your feelings. Like, sometimes I start to feel jealous, and I realize that's silly. Or I don't, I start to feel things. I'm legitimately feeling them, but I don't have to trust them as fact or accurate. So questioning your feelings is a good strategy too, I think. But when I tell people this, they just get mad at me.
I wanted to add that there are two sets of facts or truths, and there are empirical truths, which are scientifically based, and then there are non-empirical truths, which are beliefs and feelings. So those are two realms.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
As far as terminology.
Yes. Thank you. They said that I did on the online school. They said in the West, there's 3 ways that we evaluate truth, which is kind of related to it. I hope is what Eugene said. One was it conforms to an orthodoxy or some kind of doctrine. So that would be like religion. The other one was it describes the world accurately. That would be more like science. And the third one was pragmatic value. So a lot of Buddhist truths are not the first two. It's pragmatic. That these are things that they're true because they affect your life. So in a lot of Buddhist texts, scholars will say that that's the measure of truth in Buddhism, is that if you do it, it works and it's effective and it has value for you. That's the true statement in Buddhism. So it's important to know which of these realms you're in. And I think Stacy and Eugene are not archaeologists, anthropologists. So they study culture, language. These are not things I learned when I was a math computer scientist, but things we talk about a lot when you're in seminary and you're studying religion, how words are used, context, they always come up with really good explanations for, why we have difficulty explaining certain things, maybe to certain groups. Seiji? Oh, right there.
Just
Hey.
briefly, I think this is fascinating and central to a lot of the issues we're facing in the country. I wanted to suggest a possible experiment because I've been trying this for 3 months. My news feed, so I have a web page with a news feed, and you could choose which sources to read. It's all CNN and Fox News. So I've been trying to read equal doses of CNN and Fox News. It has not helped me get on the beam, I could tell you that. My blood pressure has gone up. But maybe we could all do that and revisit this subject.
Right.
We could all try reading CNN and Fox and then come back and talk about what we learned.
Right. Namo Amida Butsu. Naman Doubts. Naman Doubts. Naman Doubts. Thank you.